The morning bells rang across the quiet courtyard of St. Mary's Convent, just like they had every day for the past 43 years. Sister Catherine opened her eyes in the small, simple room that had been her home for nearly half her life. At 78 years old, her body moved slowly as she prepared for another day of prayer, work, and silence. But there was something different about Sister Catherine that none of her fellow sisters knew. Hidden beneath her quiet, humble exterior was a secret that had been locked away for decades. Long before she took her vows, before she dedicated her life to serving God, she had been someone completely different. As a young woman, Catherine had lived in a small town where music filled every corner of her world. Her father worked at the local factory, and her mother took in sewing to make ends meet. Money was tight, but somehow her parents had managed to buy an old, beaten-up piano from a neighbor who was moving away. It wasn't much to look at, with its chipped keys and scratched wood, but to young Catherine it was pure magic. She remembered the first time she touched those keys. She was only 7 years old, and the sound that came out was nothing special, just random notes that didn't make much sense. But something inside her lit up like a spark. Every day after school, she would rush home and sit at that old piano, teaching herself to play by ear. Her parents couldn't afford lessons, so she learned by listening to the radio and trying to copy the melodies she heard. By the time she was 15, Catherine could play songs that made the neighbors stop and listen through their open windows. She had a natural gift that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. The local church asked her to play for Sunday services, and soon, people from other towns were coming just to hear the young woman with the magical fingers. Her talent caught the attention of Mr. Peterson, who owned the only music school within 50 miles. He offered to teach her for free because he said it would be a crime to let such talent go to waste. For 3 years, Catherine studied classical music, learning pieces by masters like Bach, Chopin, and Mozart. Her fingers danced across the keys like they were born to be there. She started performing at small venues around the area. Nothing fancy, just local events, church gatherings, and the occasional wedding. But people talked about her. They said she didn't just play music. She made it come alive. When Catherine played, it was like the piano was singing, telling stories that went straight to people's hearts. Then everything changed when she turned 21. Her younger brother got sick with pneumonia, and the medical bills piled up like snow in winter. Her father lost his job at the factory, and the family faced losing their home. Catherine knew she had to help. She took a job at a local diner, working long hours to help pay the bills. The piano sat silent for months. During this difficult time, Catherine found herself praying more than she ever had before. She spent hours in the small-town church, asking God for strength and guidance. The quiet peace she found there began to mean more to her than the applause she once received. Slowly, she felt something calling her toward a different kind of life. When her family's situation finally improved and her brother recovered, Catherine made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She announced that she was going to become a nun. Her friends thought she was crazy. Her music teacher begged her to reconsider, telling her she was throwing away a gift that could take her anywhere in the world. But Catherine felt certain about her choice. She believed God was calling her to serve in a different way. On a cold morning in early spring, she packed her few belongings, said goodbye to her family, and walked through the gates of St. Mary's Convent for the first time. The convent was a world away from everything she had known. The sisters who lived there believed in simplicity and devotion. They woke before dawn for prayers, spent their days in quiet service, and went to bed early. There was no room for individual talents or personal pursuits. Everyone was equal in their dedication to God. When Catherine first saw the old piano in the corner of the community room, her heart skipped a beat. It was even older than the one she had learned on as a child, with keys that had turned yellow, with age and wood that had seen better days, but to her it was beautiful. During her first week, she asked Mother Superior if she could play it sometimes, maybe for evening prayers or special occasions. The answer was firm and clear. No. Mother Superior explained that fancy music was a distraction from the spiritual life they were trying to live. The piano was only to be used for simple hymns and only by sisters who had been given permission. That permission never came for Catherine. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. She watched as other sisters struggled, through basic melodies during prayer time, hitting wrong notes and playing with uncertain timing. Her fingers would twitch under her habit, remembering complex pieces she once knew by heart. Sometimes, late at night when everyone else was asleep, Catherine would sneak into the community room and sit at the piano bench. She never played, but she would place her hands on the keys and remember. She could hear the music in her mind, every note as clear as if she were actually playing. These midnight visits became her secret comfort. The years passed slowly. Catherine threw herself into the work of the convent. She helped in the kitchen, tended the small garden, and spent countless hours in prayer. She genuinely found peace in this simple life. But there was always a small part of her that felt incomplete, like a bird that had forgotten how to sing. Other sisters came and went over the decades. Some were young when they arrived. Others were older women seeking a quiet place to spend their final years. Catherine watched them all, always kind, always helpful, never mentioning her past life or the music that still lived inside her heart. The piano grew more neglected as the years went, but dust gathered on its surface and some of the keys started sticking. Occasionally a visiting priest would play a simple tune, or a new sister would attempt a hymn, but mostly it sat silent like a sleeping giant in the corner. By the time Catherine reached her 70s, most people at the convent had forgotten that she had ever mentioned wanting to play. She had become known as the quiet sister who always had a kind word, who never complained, and who worked harder than women half her age. Her musical past seemed like a dream from another lifetime, but inside, the music never truly died. Sometimes, while washing dishes, her hands would move in rhythm to melodies only she could hear. While walking in the garden, she would find herself humming tunes from her youth. The gift was still there, buried beneath decades of silence, waiting like a seed in winter soil. Catherine never imagined that one day, that seed would finally get the chance to bloom again, in a way that would touch hearts around the world. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when Sister Margaret noticed water dripping from the ceiling of the chapel during morning prayers. What began as a few drops quickly became a steady stream, and by afternoon, buckets were scattered across the floor to catch the growing leaks. Mother Superior called an emergency meeting that evening. The sisters gathered in the community room, their faces showing worry as they looked up at the water stains spreading across their own ceiling. The contractor who came to inspect the damage delivered news that hit like a thunderbolt. The entire roof needed to be replaced, and it would cost more money than the convent had seen in decades. $60,000, Mother Superior announced to the group, her voice heavy with concern. That's what we need to raise, and we need it soon. The next big storm could cause serious damage to the building. The sisters sat in stunned silence. Their small convent barely had enough money to cover basic expenses like food and utilities. They grew their own vegetables, mended their own clothes, and lived as simply as possible. Where could they possibly find such a large amount of money? Sister Agnes, who handled the convent's finances, spoke up first. We could write letters to the parishes and surrounding towns asking for donations. Maybe some of the local businesses would help too. Others suggested bake sales, craft fairs, and even the possibility of selling some of the convent's unused land. But everyone knew these efforts, while noble, wouldn't come close to raising the money they needed quickly enough. Then Sister Helen, one of the younger nuns, raised her hand tentatively. What about a benefit concert? I've seen other organizations do them successfully. We have that beautiful community room, and if we invited people from all over the county. The idea sparked immediate interest. Several sisters began talking at once, sharing stories of concerts they had attended before joining the convent. The excitement was contagious, but then reality set in. Who would perform? Asked Sister Dorothy. We'd need real musicians, people who could draw a crowd willing to pay good money for tickets. Mother Superior nodded thoughtfully. Sister Helen, why don't you contact some of the music teachers from the local schools? Maybe they know professional musicians who would donate their time for a good cause. Over the next few weeks, Sister Helen worked tirelessly on the project. She reached out to everyone she could think of, from church organists to high school band directors. The response was better than expected. Several local musicians agreed to perform, and word began spreading throughout the community about the benefit concert for St. Mary's Convent. The featured performer was going to be Professor Williams, A.I.D., respected pianist who taught at the university 2 towns over. He had agreed to play several classical pieces, which would be the main attraction of the evening. Local newspapers wrote articles about the upcoming event, and advance ticket sales were promising. Catherine watched all the preparations with quiet interest. She helped clean and decorate the community room, arrange chairs, and prepare refreshments for the intermission. Seeing the old piano being tuned and polished brought back memories she had long kept buried. The instrument looked better than it had in years, its wooden surface gleaming under the lights they had installed for the concert. As the date approached, excitement filled the convent. Even Mother Superior seemed to catch the enthusiasm, though she reminded everyone that this was a serious fundraising effort, not just entertainment. The sisters practiced their roles as ushers and hosts, wanting everything to be perfect. Then, 3 days before the concert, disaster struck. Professor Williams called with terrible news. He had been rushed to the hospital with severe pneumonia and would be unable to perform. His doctor said he would be hospitalized for at least a week, maybe longer. Panic set in immediately. They had sold over 200 tickets. People had made plans to attend, and local newspapers had already published articles about the event. Sister Helen spent hours on the phone, desperately trying to find a replacement pianist, but everyone was either unavailable on such short notice or lived too far away to make the trip. "We'll have to cancel," Mother Superior said during an emergency meeting the night before the concert. "We'll refund the ticket money and apologize to everyone. It's disappointing, but we have no choice." The sisters looked defeated. They had worked so hard, and their hopes had been raised so high. Some of the older nuns began talking about alternative fundraising ideas, but everyone knew this had been their best chance to raise significant money quickly. Catherine sat quietly in the back of the room, listening to the worried conversations around her. Her heart ached seeing her sisters so discouraged. These women had become her family over the decades, and their home was in real danger. The thought of their beautiful chapel being damaged by rain, of possibly having to leave the only home she had known for so long, was almost unbearable. As the meeting was about to end, Catherine stood up slowly. Her movement caught everyone's attention because she rarely spoke during group discussions. "Mother Superior," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I could play." The room fell silent. Some of the sisters looked confused, while others seemed to have forgotten that Catherine had ever mentioned playing piano decades ago. "Sister Catherine," Mother Superior said gently, "that's very kind of you to offer, but we need someone who can really perform. These people are paying good money, and they're expecting—" "I can really perform," Catherine interrupted quietly, something she had never done before in all her years at the convent. "I know I haven't played in a long time, but I remember. I could do it." Sister Helen looked hopeful but uncertain. "What kind of music do you know? Do you remember any classical pieces?" Catherine nodded. "Chopin, Bach, Mozart. I remember many pieces. If you give me a few hours with the piano, I could prepare a program." Mother Superior frowned. She remembered Catherine's early requests to play, and she remembered denying them because she believed fancy music was inappropriate for their simple religious life. The idea of one of her nuns performing like a concert pianist in front of a paying audience seemed almost scandalous. "Sister Catherine, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I don't think you understand what we need. This isn't a simple hymn for prayer time. These people are expecting a real concert performance." "I understand," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger. "And I can give them that. Please just let me try. What do we have to lose at this point?" The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Some sisters were intrigued, others seemed skeptical, and a few looked worried about the risk of embarrassing the convent. Finally, with less than 18 hours until the concert was scheduled to begin, and with no other options available, Mother Superior made a decision that would change everything. "All right, Sister Catherine, you can try. But if it doesn't work out during your practice session, we'll have to cancel the concert. Too much is at stake to take unnecessary risks." Catherine nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement she hadn't felt in over 4 decades. That night, for the first time in 43 years, she would sit down at a piano, not just to remember, but to actually play. The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Catherine finally had her chance to sit alone with the piano. The community room had been transformed for the evening's concert. Rows of chairs faced the small stage area, where the old piano now gleamed under the warm lighting. Fresh flowers decorated the space, and programs had been neatly stacked on a table near the entrance. But Catherine barely noticed any of these preparations. Her entire focus was on the instrument that had been calling to her for over 4 decades. She approached it slowly, almost reverently, like someone greeting an old friend after a very long separation. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the piano bench and sat down. The keys looked different than she remembered, yellowed with age but still beautiful in their own way. She placed her fingers on the familiar pattern of black and white, and for a moment she just sat there, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. Then, very softly, she pressed middle C. The sound rang out clear and true, filling the empty room with a single perfect note. Something inside Catherine's chest loosened, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too many years. She began with simple scales, her fingers moving cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath decades of disuse but very much alive. Her hands remembered the patterns, the stretches, the delicate touch needed to make music instead of just noise. Within minutes she was playing a simple Bach invention, one of the first pieces she had learned as a young woman. The melody flowed from the piano like water that had finally found its way around a dam. Catherine closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling more like herself than she had in years. For the next hour, she played through piece after piece, each one coming back to her as if she had practiced it just yesterday. Her fingers grew stronger and more agile with each passing minute. By the time she finished, she knew she was ready. But being ready and feeling confident were 2 very different things. The next evening arrived with gray clouds gathering overhead, threatening, rain that would only remind everyone why they were there in the first place. By 7 o'clock, people began filling the community room. Catherine watched from behind a small curtain as families, elderly couples, and groups of friends found their seats. She recognized many faces from the local community. There was Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store, sitting with her husband in the 3rd row. The mayor had come with his wife, and she spotted several teachers from the local schools. Some people she didn't recognize at all, which meant word had spread beyond their immediate area. What struck Catherine most was how dressed up everyone was. The men wore their best suits, and the women had put on elegant dresses and jewelry. These people had come expecting a real concert, not just a simple church performance. They had paid good money and cleared their Saturday evening schedules. The weight of that expectation settled on Catherine's shoulders like a heavy blanket. Sister Helen stood near the entrance, greeting people and handing out programs. She kept glancing toward the curtain where Catherine waited, giving encouraging smiles whenever their eyes met. Mother Superior moved through the crowd, thanking people for coming and explaining the importance of the fundraising effort. Catherine noticed that several people had their phones out, taking pictures of the decorated room and the piano. The thought that someone might record her performance sent a new wave of nervousness through her body. She had never performed for anyone except small local audiences, decades ago, when the stakes were much lower. At exactly 8 o'clock, Mother Superior stepped to the front of the room and called for everyone's attention. The conversations gradually died down as 200 faces turned toward the small stage area. "Good evening, friends and neighbors," Mother Superior began. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for this special benefit concert. As many of you know, St. Mary's Convent needs to repair our roof. and your generous support tonight will help us preserve this sacred place that has served our community for over a century." She paused as gentle applause filled the room. Catherine watched from behind the curtain, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Tonight's performer is someone very special to our convent family. Sister Catherine has been with us for 43 years, serving quietly and faithfully. What many of you don't know is that before she answered God's call to religious life, she was an accomplished pianist. Catherine saw some people in the audience exchange glances. A few whispered to their companions, probably wondering why they had never heard about a talented musician living right in their community. Sister Catherine will be performing several classical pieces for us this evening. Please join me in welcoming her. The applause that followed was polite but uncertain. Catherine could practically feel the questions hanging in the air. People had come expecting to hear Professor Williams, a well-known concert pianist. Instead, they were getting an elderly nun they had never heard of. Catherine took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the curtain. The first thing she noticed was how bright the light seemed compared to the dim area where she had been waiting. The second thing she noticed was how quiet the room became as people got their first real look at their unexpected performer. She walked slowly toward the piano, very aware of every step. Her simple black habit and white head covering stood in stark contrast to the elegant concert attire most performers would wear. Some people in the audience shifted in their seats. Others checked their watches or phones. As she approached the piano bench, Catherine could hear scattered whispers from the crowd. She caught fragments of conversations. How old is she? Has anyone ever heard her play? This should be interesting. She sat down and adjusted the bench height, just as she had done hundreds of times in her youth. Her hands found their position above the keys, and she looked out at the audience one more time. The faces looking back at her showed a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and polite patience. In the back of the room, she spotted Mother Superior standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Sister Helen gave her an encouraging nod from near the door. The other sisters from the convent sat together in the front row, their hands folded in their laps, clearly nervous about what was about to happen. Catherine realized that this moment was about much more than just raising money for a roof. This was about proving that dreams never truly die, even when they're buried for decades. This was about showing that God's gifts can emerge at any time in any place through any person willing to use them. She closed her eyes for just a moment, said a quick prayer, and then placed her fingers on the keys. The room fell completely, silent as if everyone was holding their breath, and then Sister Catherine began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor floated into the silent room like drops of liquid gold. Catherine's fingers found their way across the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. The opening melody was soft and haunting, each note perfectly placed and crystal clear. At first, the audience remained politely quiet, the kind of respectful silence people maintain when they're not quite sure what to expect. A few people in the back rows continued their whispered conversations, and someone near the door was still checking their phone. But as the music continued, something magical began to happen. The simple melody started to build, becoming more complex and emotionally rich with each passing measure. Catherine's hands moved with increasing confidence, her left hand providing a solid foundation, while her right hand danced through the intricate passages that made Chopin's music so beloved by pianists around the world. Mrs. Peterson, who had been fanning herself with her program just moments before, let her hand drop to her lap as she leaned forward in her seat. The mayor, who had been glancing at his watch, found himself completely absorbed in the music. Even the teenagers who had come reluctantly with their parents stopped scrolling through their phones and looked up at the stage in amazement. Catherine felt the familiar rush of connection between her heart, her hands, and the instrument. It was like speaking a language she had almost forgotten, but that came flooding back the moment she needed it. Every emotion she had kept hidden for 4 decades seemed to pour out through her fingertips. The joy of her youth, the sadness of leaving music behind, the peace she had found in religious life, and the quiet longing that had never completely disappeared. As the first piece reached its dramatic climax, with powerful chords that filled Every corner of the room, Catherine opened her eyes and saw something that took her breath away. Every single person in the audience was completely focused on her. The whispered conversations had stopped. The phone checking had ended. Even the small children were sitting perfectly still, mesmerized by the sounds coming from the old piano. Kaki. Final notes of the Chopin piece faded into silence, and for a moment nobody moved. It was as if the entire room was afraid to break the spell that had been cast. Then, like a dam bursting, the applause began. It started with one person clapping enthusiastically, then spread quickly through the room until everyone was on their feet, clapping with genuine amazement and appreciation. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. She had forgotten how it felt to touch people's hearts through music, to see the immediate impact of sharing something beautiful with others. But she wasn't finished yet. Without speaking, she transitioned into Bach's Italian Concerto, her fingers flying across the keys with remarkable speed and precision. This piece was more technical, requiring both hands to work independently while creating the illusion of a full orchestra. It was the kind of music that showed off a pianist's skill and training. The audience settled back into their seats, but their attention remained completely focused on the stage. Catherine's performance was revealing layers of talent that nobody had imagined existed. Her technique was flawless, her interpretation mature and deeply felt. This wasn't just someone who used to play piano years ago. This was a true musician who had somehow kept her abilities sharp, despite decades away from regular practice. A woman in the fifth row leaned over to her husband and whispered, "She's incredible. How is this possible?" Others were having similar quiet conversations, amazed that such extraordinary talent had been hidden in their small community for so long. As Catherine moved through the Bach piece, her confidence continued to grow. Her body relaxed into the familiar rhythms of performance, and her face began to show the pure joy she felt in making music again. The years seemed to melt away from her features, and glimpses of the young woman she once was became visible to everyone watching. When the Bach concluded, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before. Several people called out, "Bravo," and "Beautiful." Catherine smiled and nodded her thanks, then prepared for her final piece of the evening. "I'd like to dedicate this last song to my sisters here at the convent," she said, speaking to the audience for the first time that evening. Her voice was clear and strong. "They have been my family for over 40 years, and this is for them." She began playing Ave Maria, but not the simple version most people knew from church services. This was Schubert's complex and emotionally rich arrangement, one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. Her interpretation was deeply spiritual, filled with the devotion and faith that had guided her life for so many decades. As the familiar melody unfolded, many people in the audience found themselves moved to tears. The music seemed to carry Catherine's entire life story within its notes. Her faith, her sacrifice, her quiet years of service, and her rediscovered joy in sharing her gift with others. Mother Superior, who had been standing rigid with worry at the back of the room, felt her own eyes fill with tears. She realized that she had been wrong all those years ago when she discouraged Catherine from playing. This wasn't a distraction from spiritual life. This was spiritual life made audible. The music was a prayer, a celebration, and a gift all at the same time. The other sisters from the convent were crying openly now, overwhelmed by pride and amazement at their humble companion's extraordinary abilities. Sister Helen, who had worked so hard to organize the concert, could hardly believe that the solution to their crisis had been sitting quietly among them all along. As the final notes of Ave Maria filled the room, something almost magical happened. The audience began singing along softly, adding their voices to the melody that Catherine continued to play. It wasn't planned or rehearsed, it just happened naturally, as if the music was calling everyone to participate in something larger than themselves. When the last note finally faded away, the silence that followed was profound and sacred. For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The experience had been so powerful, so unexpected, and so beautiful that words seemed inadequate. Then the applause began again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just appreciation for a good performance. It was gratitude for witnessing, something extraordinary, something that had touched their hearts and souls in a way they would never forget. People jumped to their feet, clapping until their hands hurt. Many were still crying, overwhelmed by the beauty they had just experienced. The teenager who had been bored at the beginning of the evening was clapping as enthusiastically as anyone else. The elderly man who had almost decided not to come was wiping tears from his eyes. Catherine stood and bowed gracefully, her face glowing with happiness and fulfillment. She had forgotten how wonderful it felt to share music with others, to be part of creating something beautiful that brought people together and lifted their spirits. As the applause continued, she looked out at the crowd and realized that something had changed forever. Not just for her, but for everyone in that room. They had all been part of something special, something they would talk about for years to come. The quiet nun who had lived among them for decades had revealed herself to be something extraordinary, and in doing so, she had reminded everyone that amazing things can happen when we least expect them. The concert ended with thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. But Catherine had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. As people slowly filed out of the community room, many stopped to speak, with her personally, shaking her hand and telling her how deeply the music had touched them. "Sister, that was absolutely incredible," said one woman, tears still visible on her cheeks. "I've been to concerts in the big city, and I've never heard anything more beautiful than what you played tonight." An elderly gentleman approached with his granddaughter, a young girl who had sat perfectly still during the entire performance. "My granddaughter wants to learn piano because of you," he said. "She's never shown interest in music before, but something about tonight inspired her." Catherine smiled warmly at the little girl, remembering her own childhood discovery of music. "Music is a wonderful gift," she told her gently. "If you decide to learn, remember that every great pianist started with just one note." What Catherine didn't know was that several people in the audience had quietly recorded parts of her performance on their phones. It wasn't planned or coordinated. It just happened naturally when people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary and wanted to capture it to share with family and friends who couldn't be there. Mrs. Peterson's daughter, who lived in California, was the first to post a short video clip on her social media accounts. She had received the video from her mother with a message that said, "You won't believe what happened at the convent tonight. This nun played piano like nothing I've ever heard before." The video was shaky, and the sound quality wasn't perfect, but it captured enough of Catherine's remarkable performance to show just how talented she was. The daughter posted it with a caption that read, "My mom sent me this video of a 78-year-old nun who has been hiding incredible musical talent for decades. She just performed her first concert in over 40 years to help save her convent. This is what pure talent looks like." Within hours, that post had been shared dozens of times. People who saw it couldn't believe what they were hearing. The combination of Catherine's age, her religious background, and her extraordinary musical ability created a story that captured people's imagination immediately. By the next morning, other attendees had posted their own videos and photos from the concert. Each post told a slightly different part of the story, but they all shared the same sense of amazement at what had happened. Comments poured in from around the country and then around the world as people shared the videos with their own friends and family members. "This gave me chills," wrote one person. "You can see the pure joy on her face as she plays. Incredible that she kept this talent hidden for so long," commented another. "What a gift she has. This is why I believe in miracles," wrote someone else. "Sometimes the most amazing things are right in front of us, waiting for the right moment to be revealed." The videos began appearing on larger social media platforms, and music blogs started writing about the mysterious piano-playing nun. Classical. Music enthusiasts shared the clips in their online communities, praising Catherine's technique and emotional depth. The story spread from person to person, computer to computer, and country to country with remarkable speed. Catherine knew none of this was happening. She woke up the morning after the concert feeling peaceful and fulfilled. The performance had been everything she had hoped for, and more. They had raised enough money to fix the roof, but more importantly, she had rediscovered a part of herself that she thought was lost forever. She went about her normal routine, helping with breakfast preparation, tending to the garden, and joining her sisters for morning prayers. Several of the other nuns mentioned how proud they were of her performance, and Mother Superior had even thanked her privately for saving the concert and the convent's roof. It was Sister Helen who first discovered what was happening online. As the person who had organized the concert, she was checking social media to see if anyone had posted photos from the event that they could use for their records. Instead, she found something that made her gasp out loud. "Mother Superior, you need to see this," she called out, her voice filled with excitement and disbelief. When Mother Superior looked at Sister Helen's computer screen, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Videos of Catherine's performance were everywhere, and they were being shared by thousands of people. Comments were pouring in from around the world, all praising the remarkable nun who had stunned everyone with her musical gift. "How many people have seen this?" Mother Superior asked, scrolling through the endless stream of shares and comments. "It's hard to tell exactly, but it looks like millions," Sister Helen replied, her eyes wide with amazement. "Look at this one video alone. It has over 2 million views already, and it was only posted yesterday." They called Catherine to come see what was happening. When she looked at the computer screen and saw her own image staring back at her from videos being watched by people around the world, she was completely stunned. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "How did this happen? I just played a few songs to help raise money for our roof." Over the next few days, the story continued to grow. Major news websites picked up the story, writing articles about the elderly nun whose hidden musical talent had been discovered at a small fundraising concert. Television news programs called the convent, asking for interviews. Music industry professionals reached out, wanting to know more about Catherine's background and training. The phone at the convent, which usually rang only a few times a week, now rang constantly. Reporters from newspapers and magazines wanted to write feature stories. Recording companies called with offers to make an album. Concert halls from around the country extended invitations for Catherine to perform. "Sister Catherine," said one caller who identified himself as a representative from a major symphony orchestra, "we would be honored to have you perform with us. We've never heard anything quite like your interpretation of those classical pieces." Another caller was from a famous music school. "We'd love to offer you a teaching position," the person said. "Your technique and musical understanding are extraordinary. You could inspire a whole new generation of pianists." The attention was overwhelming for Catherine and the other sisters. They had lived quiet, private lives for so long that the sudden flood of interest felt almost surreal. Camera crews started showing up at the convent gates hoping to get footage of the now famous nun. But despite all the offers and opportunities, Catherine remained humble and committed to her life of service. When reporters asked if she planned to leave the convent to pursue a music career, she smiled gently and shook her head. "This is my home," she said simply. "These sisters are my family. Music is a gift that I'm grateful to share, but my calling is here." However, Catherine and Mother Superior did agree to allow her to perform at selected charity events. The requests were so numerous that they had to be very selective, choosing only events that would help other religious communities or support important causes. Her second public performance was at a benefit for a children's hospital, and once, again, the response was overwhelming. This time, professional video crews recorded the entire concert, and the footage was shared with even more people around the world. Catherine's story became a symbol of hope and inspiration for people of all ages. She proved that it's never too late to share your gifts with the world, that talent can survive even when it's buried for decades, and that the most extraordinary things can be found in the most unexpected places. Letters poured in from aspiring musicians who had been inspired by her story to pursue their own musical dreams. Elderly people wrote to thank her for showing that age doesn't limit what you can accomplish. People from all walks of life shared how her music had touched their hearts and reminded them of the beauty that exists in the world. Catherine read each letter carefully, touched by how her simple decision to help save her convent's roof had somehow reached so many people and made such a difference in their lives. She had lived most of her adult life in quiet service, never seeking attention or recognition. Now in her late 70s, she had become an inspiration to millions of people around the world. But the most important thing to Catherine was that she had rediscovered the joy of making music and sharing it with others. Every time she sat down, at the piano now, she felt the same sense of connection and purpose that had drawn her to music as a young girl. The gift had never really been lost. It had just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again.